good afternoon, good morning to our West Coast fans. So today's presentation is going to be kind of a fun one. We've got Mark Stone, our CEO, but he's being joined by Jamshid Arjomand, our Chief Science Officer, and our Chief Community Engagement Officer, Beth Johnston.
Thank you, Heidi, and thank you all for being here. It was heartwarming, really. Not just to see the list of the folks who've signed up, but to watch you all get on and knowing that how valuable your time is and that you've chosen to spend this time, because we all, the group of us, are invested in seeing this thing through. And so again, your commitment, your passion, your creativity, your energy is the jet fuel that fuels us here on staff, and your heart is in our heart, and we love you more than we can say. Partnering to accelerate therapeutic development. Wow, what a statement. As a matter of fact, we made a pretty bold declaration about 3 years ago. And we understood that it would take about 5 to 6 years. And so we plotted out a course to see fulfillment of our statement. And we knew that the work we had to do had to be done in the next 6 years. And so I thought it was good to take this time during this spring, 3 years into our goal, our quest, and really a statement that I've somewhat been criticized about, where we've drawn a line in the sand and said, as much as in us lies, we will have therapies to our families by 2025. Obviously, we're not creating compounds in the back room at the FSHD Society. But we understand that an organization like ours can play an oversized role globally once basic research has had enough discoveries and brought us to a point in time. And when I arrived here at the latter half of 2017, as I traveled, as I talked to researchers and our families and pharmaceutical companies, about 4 main ones that were in our space at the time, I got this image that I believe that with a lot of hard work, with building a stronger, more growing community, and with focusing all of our global efforts toward a few things, that we could eliminate the obstacles and lower the threshold. And so how have we done? This is kind of the midpoint in that. 2018 to 23. By the way, you might be saying, well, so we're going to have therapies now by 2023. I wish, and I could only hope. But we know that the preclinical and pre-competitive work has to be done so that the FDA can adjudicate things appropriately. And we also know that it takes them a year to 18 months, sometimes 2 years normally. Obviously, the COVID vaccine didn't. But normally it takes that long to go through an approval process. So that's kind of the runway that we knew we had back in 2018. And so we set out. There were some things that we did. So in 2018, we began to reimagine and re-engineer the FSHD Society toward one goal: therapies to our families by 2025. Those of you who are around might remember, because I quoted it often, it was a statement, you know, the future is not a place we are going, but a place we are creating. First in mind, that reimagine, then in will, and then in activity, the re-engineering part. We also know that based on studies, we knew that there were 2 ingredients that are known to shorten the therapeutic development timeline by about 2/3. Typically, the therapeutic development timeline is 15 to 20 years. You take 10 to 15,000 compounds to get one approved FDA drug. And that costs between $500 million and $1 billion. And that economy, even with the knowledge base we have and everything, all of the technology and AI and all of that, still hasn't been shortened, except there are moments in time and there are ingredients that an organization like ours can provide that actually reduce that development time. Again, given enough science and research that has brought the field to a certain point, which I believe we have, that could literally shorten the time frame down to 5 years, sometimes less. And those two ingredients, we've talked about this before, are collective intent, which the definition of that is the fusion of thought that comes from a shared sense of urgency. Some people said, well, why do you say 2025? Because with a chronic disease that goes on and sometimes is slow progression or goes through cycles of quick and then stable and quick and stable, um, you have a tendency sometimes to lose the urgency in research, to lose the urgency in clinicians, to lose the urgency to really pay the price that we needed to pay to see it done quickly, see it done right, but quickly. So there is that collective intent with researchers lowering the silos. And then there was the patient advocate. Those two ingredients make a difference, make a big difference. And the patient advocate is a patient centric approach. In other words, the patient is in the center of everything that occurs and happens in advancing and accelerating clinical development and therapeutic development and ultimately regulatory approval. And the FSHD community's voice, it allows it to be heard and it allows your involvement to make a difference. And so we knew that those two things were the elements and ingredients. So consequently, based on that strategy, based on that, our strategy was really simple. But my son one time was telling me about a project and he said, Dad, I told them it was simple, but that simple does not always equate to easy. And I tell you that too. Our strategy was simple though, simple to understand, but certainly not easy. And that was, we launched a Therapeutic Accelerator initiative. And that really kind of was to focus on that collective intent, bringing all the stakeholders together to serve as a catalyst, leveraging stakeholders around the world, their engagement for mutual benefit, and so that things could move forward in a cohesive fashion without wasting a lot of energy. There was also a community engagement initiative, which is the patient advocate. And that really was to serve to enlarge, engage, and empower an active global community. And as I like to think, speaking with one voice, 1 million strong, one voice, 1 million strong. And that then sends a message that cannot be ignored and does make a difference. And we knew that we had to grow the base and we knew that we had to rally all of the clinicians and the researchers and the pharmaceuticals to begin to focus on those obstacles that were in our way. We knew that that was what we had reimagined, what we had re-engineered based on those ingredients that we knew were known to shorten the therapeutic development. And so for the rest of our time together, I want us to look at the progress to date of these two initiatives. And we're going to talk about the Therapeutic Accelerator, or that collective intent, at the first, and then Jamshid's going to talk with us. And then I want to share a little bit about how we have done to enlarge, engage, and empower an active global community. And then Beth's going to share some thoughts there. And then I'll wrap up. And so that's kind of the agenda left for the rest of the day. So the Therapeutic Accelerator. We launched the Therapeutic Accelerator this time 3 years ago. Uh, the board of directors looked over our strategy, looked over our implementation plans, gave approval, and we announced it at the June Patient Connect meeting that this was our path forward and this was what we were going to do. As a part of this, as we went about in 2000, in the third and the fourth quarter of 2018, to really rally support, both monetary and conceptual support, When we had a base of dollars that we raised, we reached out and we hired Dr. Jamshid Arjomand as our Chief Science Officer to really lead this endeavor and to provide that expertise that we knew we needed in order to move forward in an aggressive fashion like we had charted and like we had planned. We shortly after that, matter of fact, it was very shortly after that, Jamshid's arrival, that we hosted the first industry collaborative on drug development in FSHD. We had over 60 people gathered, really close to the FDA in Bethesda, Maryland, and the FDA was there, the NIH was there. There were about 8 pharmaceutical research teams there. There were clinicians, researchers, and FSHD funding groups there, all by our invitation as we hosted that. And our goal and our idea, again, in that collective intent, that fusion of thought that comes from a shared sense of urgency, a shared sense of purpose, we wanted to get everybody around the table. And so, as I mentioned, we invited the pharmaceuticals, the academic community, the regulatory community, the funding groups, and we invited our clinical trial research network. We'll hear more about that later, but we had all the principles that we felt were needed in order to identify and begin to chart the path toward eliminating the obstacles in the clinical trial and the clinical development pathway that are inherent in FSHD. As a part of that, after we came to an agreement on what those barriers were, we began to launch projects and initiatives aimed at eliminating the barriers. And real quick and real simple, the barriers for me fall into 4 main buckets. We've diagrammed this in past webinars as a bridge, and we've filled in the bridges, and we're, the general contractors and all of that. But suffice it to say that if you have a natural history, if you have something that you can bank on flowing in a disease format, and then you present a therapy that stops that natural history of degradation, then you know that that works. And right now, we really need that. Genetic diagnosis was really hard to get. It was really costly to get, and we knew that those were some obstacles there. Molecular biomarkers, a blood-based circulating biomarker that literally, if you take a blood sample, you see some things in there that can only be in the blood if you have FSHD active in your body. If you take a pill, you take the blood, it's not there. I'm oversimplifying, grossly oversimplifying. But you understand, I think, what that biomarker is. It kind of helps tell whether a therapeutic is being effective or not, without a movement or functional test or some things that are a little more challenging for our to determine in a clinical trial setting. Imaging biomarkers and clinical outcome measures. And in clinical outcome measures, this is where we wanted to incorporate the patient's voice in outcome measures, in literally informing, instructing, educating, and equipping the FDA to know what a suitable standard for us was for an effective therapy. So their standard might have been over here, and we wanted the standard here, and that matters. And so we knew that that was a challenge, and that was something we needed to do, as well as validating some clinical tests that could be run in a 6-month time frame or a 9-month time frame in a typical clinical trial, and show effect of a drug. And our clinical trial research network that we had helped launch in 2016 is absolutely critical to that. Anyway, those were the projects. In addition to this, we knew that we wanted the global research and clinical development group to begin to move all in the same direction. So the now 30th anniversary, or at least I think on the 28th anniversary or the 28th annual International Research Congress, we hosted for the first time in Europe, and we had the largest attendance ever. We expanded the clinical trial research network, which I've talked about, to 18 sites. Uh, we started out with 4, it expanded to 8. They added 3 in Europe. We knew that we needed more. There were some pockets and holes around some of our patient communities. And so we funded even more in order to bring 4 more on. And right now it stands at 18. And let me very quickly say that um, the Resolve study and the MOVE protocol, which they're moving into, and the fact that this has become the global core network for a lot of our therapeutic accelerator initiatives that will require multi-site validation. And it has become the core therapeutic and clinical network for clinical trials from maybe ATIR, certainly Acceleron and Fulcrum, and 3 others that we know are going to launch in the last part of this year or perhaps the first part of 2022. It is absolutely an essential piece. It is the crown jewel in clinical development in FSHD. And it is in large part, I believe, why we have now over a dozen um, therapeutic, a dozen pharmaceuticals working in our space. So we also hosted the Voice of the Patient Forum with the FDA, over 600 participants. They now have a document documenting not just the burden of FSHD, but also suitable therapies that you would like to see in FSHD. And it does make a difference. By the way, this Voice of the Patient Forum is now known, based on FDA comment to us, as the gold standard of these kinds of meetings with the FDA. Our families uh, responded unbelievably well. So thank you. You were a lot of those who responded. Uh, we facilitated in launching a lower cost genetic test. We've actually reduced the cost, and we've seen the cost reduced from about 2,500 typical and a really hard to get, maybe 2 places, 3 places in the whole world that you could get a genetic test, to commercialized about $699. And we're even working harder on building out that genetic test pipeline so it's not so hard to get. Launched blood biomarker projects, and I would love to talk a lot about this, but I think Jamshid's going to talk about this. It's really incredible, promising results. As a matter of fact, in the past 3 years, we have invested $5 million directly in scientific and clinical research. And we're currently working with over a dozen pharmaceuticals, as I mentioned before. Here's a name of a few. We actually got what I would call a feeler call from another pharmaceutical yesterday, wanting some information, and we're following up with that. And so it's really, really good. Besides those 4 buckets that were identified at that first industry collaborative meeting, we know that the closer we get to a therapy to our families, that there are some critical clinical initiatives that interface with our patient community that an organization like ours would do well to take part in and or to take the lead in. And one of those that we've launched just this year in cooperation with Optum, which is a United Health subsidiary organization, and Sinos Health, is a health economic report. Every pharmaceutical wants a health economic report. It helps gauge how they price their, the disease burden and the cost of the disease. It helps gauge how they price that. It helps the insurance industry gauge, how they pay, the payer system, and it helps, pharmaceuticals and the payer system know what the disease burden is going forward. And the last 2 initiatives that we're doing here that really strongly interface and are on behalf of our patient community is really equipping and training clinicians right now, even before therapies hit the market, with how to best provide care for all of our families with FSHD. And so updating the standards of care so that every neuromuscular specialist knows what the standard of care should be when they see any of our families worldwide with FSHD. and to provide uh, a clinical medical education or continuing medical education master's class on FSHD that will be able to be seen by clinicians, neuromuscular specialists in particular, everywhere. Right now, it's my pleasure and privilege to present to you not just our Chief Science Officer, but my friend and someone who is so well equipped to lead us in this area, Jamshid Arjomand. Jamshid, you have the floor.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to get control of the slides. Thank you very much for the kind introduction and for the opportunity to present alongside with you and Beth. Uh, let's see how I can advance these. As Mark mentioned, the industry collaborative meeting that was held shortly after I joined the society really helped identify the number of gaps in clinical trial readiness. And so what I thought would be useful would maybe to highlight one of these and go into a little bit more detail on what the multi-pronged approach is that we've been developing to try to address them. So as you can imagine, for any therapeutic strategy that is targeting DUX4, the toxic gene in FSHD, it's really important to be able to measure either the levels of DUX4 directly or have a reporter on DUX4 activity indirectly. And this is essentially what a biomarker would be. It would be to report on DUX4 activity. And as many of you know, measuring DUX4 itself is very, very challenging. So most current strategies rely on measuring DUX4 activity, and the current practices rely on invasive and painful muscle biopsies. And I'm sure many of you have been participating in several studies where muscle biopsies are required. So you know how that they can be uncomfortable. There's another limitation with the muscle biopsy is that the muscle biopsy only reports on the muscle being sampled. So you don't get a full vision of what's happening in the whole body. And would be really advantageous if there was an assay or a test that could be done that's less invasive, let's say through a blood draw, that could not only report on DUX4 activity, but could give a view of what's happening in the body's entire musculature. And that's the aim of this initiative, is really to try to discover one of these. And so the approach that we took was we held a workshop about a year ago where we invited all of the stakeholders that Mark had mentioned, academics, pharmaceutical companies. And the main goal was to review the existing body of literature and research that had been carried out so we could expedite the process. So we're trying to build on existing knowledge and very quickly design go, no-go studies that can either rule candidate biomarkers in or out. So this essentially, we're looking for the proverbial low-hanging fruit. And the meeting was fruitful. We identified several types of candidate biomarkers. So for some of these, there was actually one that was already being studied by an academic group. So they already had the knowledge base on how to proceed with it. And to develop a biomarker assay, what's really needed are a series of very specific reagents. And the process is accelerated if they don't have to develop and build these new reagents. And so here, specifically, we're looking at commercial antibodies. And thankfully, there were a series of antibodies that had already were available for this candidate biomarker, but none of them had been tested in the context of FSHD. So the society funded the academic lab to actually test all the reagents and see if any of them would be suitable. And then for some other candidates, we were lucky enough that there were actual commercially developed assays for clinical use that had been developed and available through contract research organizations or CROs. And one of these companies, Olink, had assays for about 3 potential candidates. And so what we did is we worked with another academic group to design a series of very quick tissue culture or test tube experiments to see if any of these might be feasible to study in FSHD. So what were the results? Well, I'm happy to say that of all the commercial antibodies that the academic group tested, several of them actually were worked out, and they were able to detect the DUX4 reporter or DUX4 activity in the blood. And so what I have here, and I apologize for the small image, but what you see here at the red line is what the background level for this candidate biomarker is in the blood of a healthy volunteer in the study. This is from blood. And as you can see, these 10 samples from FSHD patients all show higher levels of expression and detection of this candidate biomarker. So this is very promising. This is the test in patient samples, and it already looks very good. With regards to the tissue culture experiment or the test tube experiment we're running, there's also good results here. 2 of the candidate biomarkers failed, but one of them looks really, really promising. And what you can see here in the lower panel on the left side, the red line indicates the level of detection of this biomarker in the solution that bathes the patient's cells. And what you can, the solution is a good proxy for blood, and what we can detect this candidate biomarker in the solution. What's really exciting is in another experiment, we treated the cells with drugs that are known to lower DUX4, and we can see that the levels of this candidate biomarker was decreased in the cell solution or the proxy for blood. So this is all very exciting and encouraging. So what are the next steps? The next steps is, although we have good reagents, we don't have an assay that's quantitative and that can accurately measure the candidate biomarker in blood at a grade sufficient for clinical studies. So to accomplish this, we're looking to hire another contract research organization that really specializes in the development of these types of assays. And they're also going to, once they develop it, they can process the assay through the regulatory approval, so it will be qualified for use in the clinic. With regards to the established assays, we are right now at the next step. We're going to be sending some patient samples to this company, Olink, to see if we can replicate and detect the candidate biomarker in the blood like we did in the tissue culture experiment. Of course, all of this work is tightly coordinated with the Clinical Trial Research Network, because they are really going to be important in the downstream validation exercise, where we're going to need longitudinal samples of very well characterized patient population to see if these levels of biomarkers are steady, or if they increase or change either during disease progression or with hopefully some useful treatments. So I hope this gives a good overview of the strategy that we're deploying for biomarkers. But as Mark mentioned, there's a lot of different initiatives on our plate right now, and all of them carry some common challenges and opportunities. And one of the main challenges is that as we start to unroll these initiatives, we're realizing that there's a lot of competing efforts and different groups working on exactly the same problem. So this is, at first glance, may seem counterintuitive, and it's you know, you have multiple groups trying to reinvent the same wheel, and it's not efficient. However, the silver lining is that since there's so many groups working on the same problems, we know we're on the right track. We know we've identified the right problems. And the other really advantage is that other groups may be using slightly different strategies. And if we can have independent validation for any of these, it's much more helpful, and it really advances the field faster. What might happen, though, is when people are working on these projects is they might be very secretive about it. And especially in industry, these activities are often siloed, and we're not aware of them doing work on any of these initiatives. By having workshops like we did for the biomarker workshop and inviting all of the stakeholders and all the pharma companies and laying out the strategy and the problem and how we're trying to solve it. Usually what this has happened is pharmaceuticals tell us what they've been doing. They also share their results with us. And the reason they do this is all of these efforts are pre-competitive and they are doing this on their own. And they see the benefit of working in a cooperative collaboration with other groups. It not only de-risks it for them financially, but as I mentioned, if there's other groups using different strategies, it actually bolsters the validity of the project, and the outcomes are ensures that there's going to be a better outcome. Unfortunately, what we're faced with quite often is time. As Mark mentioned, there's about a dozen companies that are working on FSHD, and some of them are poised to start clinical trials very soon. And we're essentially playing catch up, trying to solve these problems in time for their clinical trials. But what really I think is going to help is the community engagement. And it's not just the stakeholders and the researchers and pharmaceutical companies, but the entire community, including the patient community that is so instrumental at not only participating and supporting all of these research efforts. And so with this, I'm happy to turn it back to you, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful. And it's unfortunately in this kind of a format, we're limited in time. We could go. Jamshid certainly could do a deep dive in this, and but suffice it to say, it's very, very exciting. And so, collective intent, that fusion of thought that comes from a shared sense of urgency, we created the infrastructure that we called the Therapeutic Accelerator Initiative to kind of umbrella these activities and these projects so that we had a good focused flow to our investment, to our work, and to the ultimate goal. But we also knew that we needed to enlarge and engage and empower an active community. And that, if you know, is a step-by-step process to find those, to engage those somewhat in what you're doing, to have our families feel then empowered, because someone who doesn't feel empowered is not going to be active or activated. But someone, many of you, almost all of you that have been empowered have now been activated, and you're making a world of difference. And so how have we done with our engaged and empower and active community? In essence, the patient advocate, that second component that's going to expedite therapies to the market. We launched a comprehensive global engagement initiative, a strategy with plans and programs and a roadmap, if you will, at the same time that we launched the Therapeutic Accelerator project, because again, those two go hand in hand. We repurposed the existing staff, Beth Johnston, who's going to be joining us in just a few moments. We commissioned her, if you will, to serve as our Chief Community Engagement Officer at that time. And we launched really a pretty revolutionary, volunteer-led, staff-resourced national chapter initiative. It was our goal in the next 5 years to have 30 chapters across the nation. We have 33 chapters after 3 years because of many of you stepped forward and said, I'll do it. If you'll help me, I'll do it. We'll get it done. And it's pretty amazing. When you look at the map and the dots on the map, 3 years ago, it was empty. There were some small groups. There were some groups that called themselves chapters. They were support groups, whatever. But now this official chapter initiative is widespread and growing stronger daily because of the strength of our volunteers. But we also launched a national signature fundraising event called Walk and Roll to Cure FSHD. We had pioneer walk and rolls. San Diego pioneered, Southern California pioneered a walk and roll, Colorado pioneered a walk and roll. And when we launched it in the second quarter of 2018, we reached out to them and a few others, maybe 5 or 6 pioneer leaders who pioneered our walk and roll event. As a matter of fact, over the past 3 years, through volunteer-led fundraising, we have donors, we have pharmaceuticals giving us sponsorship and some money, but through our volunteer-led fundraising, we've raised over $1.8 million through our volunteers' efforts, which is, by the way, a 240% increase over the previous 3-year time frame. Amazing, amazing. We also launched World FSHD Alliance, and we are facilitating that development. It is a federation of patient organizations. Some of them we really initiated with the leader in that country, and now they have grown and expanded and some of those kinds of things. And as a matter of fact, our world map of FSHD patient group influence through the World FSHD Alliance now looks like this, and it's growing stronger every week, every month, every day, because we know that in a rare disease, it's going to take more than just what we can get together. And so we wanted to create this global network. It was one of the initiatives and one of the mandates, if you will, from our leadership, our board, and our executive committee in particular. As a part of that, remember, it's to engage and empower so that we can activate the community to move forward as one, speaking with one voice, 1 million strong. As a part of that, we launched purpose-centered educational programming to enhance, engage, and empower our families. Things like FSHD University, FSHD 360, which is the former Family Days, but reimagined that, FSHD Radio, chapter meetings, and the like. And it's amazing what those have done. As a matter of fact, our 3-year growth totals, when I finally sat down and put this to a calculator, I was stunned. We have over 10,000 new people identified and connected with the FSHD Society in the past 3 years. What started out 3 years ago as about 8,000 people has now grown to 19,000, almost 20,000 people. It's just pretty amazing. We have over 4,600 more individuals participating, active in some form of programming or financial or volunteer support annually, which is 162% increase. Amazing. And we have 168 more what we would call core volunteer leaders and supporters. By the way, it's that group of people, it's you that get invited to this webinar for us. And so we've got 168 more that got the invitation over this time. And believe me, leaders like you don't grow on trees. And so the fact that we've been able to grow by 22% there is really pretty phenomenal. And now I want to hand it over to Beth Johnston, our Chief Community Engagement Officer, to share her heart and her vision and the produce of all that we do.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. It is so nice to see so many familiar names here today. I just love when the community comes together. This is wonderful. But as Mark said, the Community Engagement Program is here to enlarge, engage, and empower a global FSHD community that will support our goal of getting therapies to our families faster. Mark gave us a brief overview of the infrastructure that we've been creating over the past 3 years. So what I want to do today is just highlight a couple of ways that our progress has really made an impact in our community. But first, why is our community engagement and the chapter and program so important? As both Mark and Jamshid mentioned, in addition to accelerating research, patient and community engagement are integral in reaching the light at the end of the tunnel and achieving our goal of getting treatments to our families by the year 2025. We need to build an army of activists to advocate and participate in this goal. And really the FSHD Society chapter program is how we're going to do that. Oh my. Mark showed you the map of all the active chapters, but these are the faces of the amazing volunteer leaders that are really making it happen. These are the people that have stepped up to help build our army of activists and lead our community and our fundraising efforts. These are the people working to build local FSHD communities all over the US and now in Canada. And these are our volunteer superheroes. We get so many great stories from folks in our community. Recently, our Central Texas chapter, led by Rachel Sarton, held a virtual meeting. Under her guidance, we sent out a series of email invitations to our Texas constituents. And on the day of the meeting, a woman attended who had just been recently diagnosed. She had made her way to our website and signed up to receive our communications, and hence received the announcement of the chapter meeting. So she was overwhelmed, first by the diagnosis itself, but then by the outpouring of community that this group showed her. She was so grateful to have found a local community for support. So these chapters and their leaders and members ensure that no one faced this disease alone. And this is just one example of the personal impact our chapter program has had. Each face you see here, they all have their own story as well, their own personal story. Okay, so Mark also mentioned we've opened up a whole new channel of fundraising via our volunteers, and we are equipped to support all sorts of events that our volunteers would like to put on. But our national signature event is the Walk and Roll to Cure FSHD. We created this fundraiser in a box, if you will, to give our volunteers something that they could put on fairly easily and have all the tools and support from us that they would need to do so. But the Walk and Roll is so much more than just a fundraiser. It's basically a servant to everything else the organization does, right? It helps build all the organizational programs, both financially and by raising awareness. It strengthens the community of people impacted by FSHD. And honestly, the community feeling that is created by something like this is not anything you can put a price tag on. It empowers people to get up and do something where they may have felt powerless before. The walk is really just merely a means to do that. It tells a story. It gives people something to talk about. It helps start the sometimes very difficult conversation and gives a reason to talk about FSHD and tell personal stories. And everyone who participates can also tell their story, whether you're a caregiver, family member, friend, whatever. Anyone who participates in these events can tell their stories of their relationship to FSHD. And these events have limitless fundraising potential because they are, of course, first a fundraiser. It still creates a fun and easy way for people to give, whether it be volunteer time, money, just work, anything. It just creates a really fun way for people to give back. And the bucket really gets filled $1 at a time. So that allows everyone to participate. These events are a vehicle for turning caring into action. I do have a story of a very timid and shy woman who came to a chapter meeting for the first time with her family. And it was her first time meeting anyone else with FSHD. I know she left the meeting really energized and came back to our next meeting full of ideas for a fundraising event. So others quickly jumped on board to help, and so began the planning for a fundraising event. Through the entire process, I could watch her come out of her shell. She was able to confront the disease, tell her family and friends about it, and she flourished as the leader. And at one point, her husband said to Mark and I have my wife back. So it's just, that's the power of these events. And I get all caught up in that story specifically. Anyway, I want you now to mark your calendars for our International Walk and Roll celebration on Saturday, September the 18th of 2021. We are super, super confident. I've got my vaccine. I'm sure a bunch of you already do, that we're going to be able to hold in-person events by September. So we're going to be ramping up our chapters to participate in this. Whether our chapters choose to participate and host a walk and roll event on that day, on the 18th, or another date in September, or just virtually, this is the day that we will host a live stream and celebrate everyone from coast to coast. So we'd love to see your participation. Please visit our website. The URL is there. And we're going to update that on a regular basis as our chapters solidify their plans for the walk and roll. Just a little bit more about the live stream event. It was so popular last year when we were forced to kind of pivot and do everything virtually that we're going to do it again this year. So again, September 18th, our wonderful radio show / podcast host, Tim Hollenbach, he's there in the middle. He's going to Zoom guests in from coast to coast over a 4-hour period and will live stream to both Facebook and to YouTube. Last year, our engagement rates went through the roof as people joined us virtually and shared how they were celebrating that day. So we're really, really, really excited to do it again this year and hope you guys can join us. So what challenges lie ahead for our community engagement? What I'm showing you here is, it's basically our strategy in a nutshell. The engagement pipeline for growing our stakeholder community is what this is. Bringing people into the top of the funnel and moving them from being consumers to being our mission partners, which is you at the bottom. So the first challenge is finding those that don't know about us, that are in our missional universe, and making them aware that we exist, basically. The second challenge then is connecting with them on different levels. The third is then engaging them a little bit further so they participate in our program and or annual support. And the final challenge then is moving those that have engaged with us to becoming our activists. These are our core volunteers and our core supporters, you. Our opportunity really lies in meeting all of these challenges with continued outreach, education, and of course, through all of our local chapters. We've really grown over the last 3 years, as Mark showed you, and more specifically in the last year, in 2020. Because of the COVID restrictions, we were actually able to reach more people virtually than we could have in the person. And people that possibly could not have attended an in-person event meeting just because of maybe their location or their mobility, they were able to participate in all of our events last year, at least starting in late February, early March. So wonderfully, our connected and engaged communities have seen 150% growth over the last 2 years. So now that we've caught their eye, we need to capture their hearts in order to achieve our common goal, right? It's so powerful when this happens. But life can get in the way. Sometimes people get distracted. So our challenge is really going to be keeping people engaged and interested, and then to become active. It's the only way we're going to reach our goals together. So, so that's that. That's our challenge and our opportunity in the coming up. Charting the course forward. So with that in mind, with the engagement pipeline in mind, our theme for 2021 is activate. This is the year for everyone to activate and move us forward faster. We have been building this infrastructure for the last few years, and now it's time to act on what we've built. You're going to be seeing this theme emphasized in pretty much everything we do this year. People really need to feel empowered, and they can't do that until they are fully engaged. So what does that mean? It means we will activate therapeutic development. As you've heard, we're going to activate through our annual IRC meeting being held this summer. We're going to be building on our national patient and family registries. We're going to be fostering industry collaboration and, of course, funding research. That's activating therapeutic development. We activate the FSHD community. We're going to do this through our chapter in-person gatherings. You're going to hear about them more. We're calling them reconnects. We are reconnecting. We're reevaluating. We're getting back together for our in-person gatherings later this year, probably starting late summer, early fall. So stay tuned. We're activating the FSHD community through our 360 educational conferences that Mark mentioned. Those are, again, our former family days. We're now calling them FSHD 360 to give a more global view of what they really are. We're activating our community through trial and study involvement, through chapter meetings, and of course, our walk and roll events. And then we're going to activate individual personal strengths. Knowledge is power, and the best way to care for ourselves is to become educated. We're going to do this through FSHD University and other webinars like this one. We're going to do it through our website blog, our patient library, our radio show, our podcast, and of course, local education events. So I filled your brain. I've been talking too much. That does it for me. I hope this has left you with a better sense of the impact that our community engagement program is really making, and some of our opportunities that lie ahead.
Thank you, Beth. It was great. You didn't talk too much. I typically talk too much, so you did wonderful. That was great. So where does that leave us? We can celebrate the past victories. We can look back and appropriately say, wow, look at how far we've come. And I think that's appropriate to do. I think it's good to do. I also think there's a danger in looking back too long and in celebrating too much. What are the challenges and opportunities that are before us? As you've seen, we're at an inflection point in FSHD therapeutic development. There's a strong alignment globally on the obstacles in clinical development and the regulatory approval. There's also a growing network of researchers, clinicians, patient funding, and research organizations all working on very focused solutions to obstacles. As a matter of fact, there was a recent third-party invested global management company did a survey of the global FSHD ecosystem, and chapter and verse, they came up with exactly the target that we're focused on. So there is this growing network that's focused on the same things, the same solutions, as Jamshid pointed out, that you know, we're all heading in the same direction. We need to head there together. And over a dozen, of course, current therapies that are in the market. We're catalyzing the global patient community. We've almost tripled the number of people that are connected to us and connected to our collective mission. And we're working with in over 20 plus countries. They're doing national webinars that we're participating in, and some of these other kinds of really exciting things to build a global base of active patients. But the danger before us is stopping halfway, short of our goal. We've been successful to date, building a focused collaborative, but now more than ever, we need to multiply our efforts to finish the last leg in the journey. I have heard your stories. My heart has been impacted by your stories. You are what drives me and us, my colleagues, the staff. I don't want to hear more stories because I want it to stop of things you've lost. We need to ask ourselves some questions at this juncture. We need to ask ourselves the question, if not us, then who? And if not right now, then when? Let's not look back over our shoulder and go, wow, we should have done that a long time ago. Let's get going with it, just as we have over these past 3 years, and really just as some of you have over these past 3 decades. We're so close. The question really isn't, can we? Can we do this? Are we big enough to do this? Are we undertaking more than we should? Can we hit 2025? The question for me in my heart is, how can we not? When I consider my family, many of you that are listening in, a part of my adopted family, I ask myself all the time, how can we not do this? We have to find a way. It will require us to recommit to seeing our initiatives through to completion, not stopping halfway, but giving the best of us and the best from us. You know, it's interesting that anybody can do the ordinary, but I want to continue to challenge us to do the extraordinary. Because you see, therapies to our families by 2025 is more than an aspirational aim. It's our bold declaration of therapies that by 2025 drive every decision made and every activity initiated. You see, the values that have sustained us for 30 years still anchor us. Creativity, community, commitment, as well as persistence and passion still shape our decisions, and they determine our actions. There is nobody but you that I want to travel this journey with. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for attending this. When we rehearsed yesterday, it was a lot shorter than this, but that's on me, not on my colleagues. But I think right now, beyond saying thank you, I think that we can take some questions as we might have them.
Great. So thank you, Mark, Jamshid, and Beth. That was tremendous. We have some time for questions. There was a Q&A tab in the lower margin of your screen, so If you'd like to type in some questions there, that would be great. We have a question that was posted before, which may be not visible to everybody. I think, Jamshid, it's for you. There was a question you referred in your talk to some competing groups. Can you clarify what you meant by that?
Sure. Competing groups can be anybody. Could be academic groups, could be other, mostly pharmaceutical companies, but it could also be other funding agencies that identified the same gap in clinical trial readiness, and they're trying to solve it. And so I think by being transparent and the way we're approaching it and having workshops and inviting all of the stakeholders, we make it known that we're interested in partnering and working with anybody doing those efforts. And we avoid duplication of efforts, and hopefully we will synergize the activities. So either we work faster together, or if they're doing something that's completely different from anything we imagine, having 2 shots on goal is always better than just one. So we try to help them out that way.
Right. So it's not really so much about competition per se, it's just avoiding overlap.
Exactly.
Better communication training. Yeah, great. There was a question whether the society will be working with groups such as the American Academy of Neurology to develop and promote the treatment guidelines that we spoke about. And I can answer that since I'm, which is yes, that we will very much be seeking to publish the guideline in a major journal. That's part of, it has to get out there to the community that matters. So that's definitely part of the plan. And that we will also be targeting physical therapists. That was another question, whether we can do that. So yes, I wanted to. There are additional questions. Are there plans to expand the CTRN further?
We're looking at that every day, almost. For instance, we're looking at the possibility of connecting some Canadian sites. We're looking at the possibility of more sites here around our active patient communities, combined with good, strong neuromuscular disease clinics in space that have an interest in FSHD. It's interesting that out of 40 plus major neuromuscular diseases, we're one of them. And just like most specialties, there's some neuromuscular specialists are in Duchenne's or et cetera. But when there's neuromuscular specialists that know and treat many of our families with FSHD, they have an expertise with it. And so we want to incorporate all of those. We do know this. We have the largest patient contact registry in the world, and it's probably only a third of the size that we need for the coming clinical trial. And so that's why our global network we're out after to build, and that's why we're out after everybody to self-identify as patients, so that we can let you know when clinical trials happen, so that it can influence where perhaps the next CTRN site is located and some of those kinds of things.
Okay. There was a question in the chat, Jamshid, I think you could answer, as asking if the work on biomarkers, if the FSHD Society could monetize that.
Yeah, so our goal really is to try to put these tools and reagents that are being developed into the public domain. As you may know, some of the biotech companies working in the space are operating on a shoestring budget, and they may not have access or be able to license anything that's patented. And we wanted to be freely available to everyone, including academic researchers that maybe there's some potential clinical trials coming down the line that are academically driven. And so we want to make sure that they also have access to those. So in short, answer is no. We may have to patent it if necessary. But still we can, just so somebody else doesn't patent it, but we would still, I think our goal would be to put it in the public domain. And I'm hoping that Mark agrees with that strategy. Okay, good.
We'll talk about this later. No.
All right, here's a question. Are there any investigations going on to see if CRISPR might help in the development of a treatment or a cure?
A great question. So we are actually going to be funding a study, a research study. Right now, the therapeutic approach that's the most advanced and most feasible are the RNA interference strategies or antisense strategies that target DUX4 transcripts. CRISPR is a little bit more challenging because you have to get an enzyme along with ASO into every single cell, into every single muscle cell. So that's the challenge, is how do you do that? And you have to genetically edit every nucleus. And the challenge here is you have to do all of them to be effective. Delivery is a major issue, and there's also a potential risk for side effects. So these type of therapies right now being developed, CRISPR therapies, typically are being done in an ex vivo, where you can take cells out of the body, genetically correct them, and then put them back in the body. So for instance, blood disorders or things where that's you can take bone marrow cells, do that, and put it back in. But it's not quite ready. But the research and the proof of concept is something that's worthwhile, and that's why we're funding those.
Good.
So there's a question here. Why are older patients excluded from most, if not all, clinical trials?
I can go ahead and answer that, even though I'm not a clinician, but I've heard the answer and it makes real good sense to me. Interventional clinical trials, where you take a pill or you have a treatment, what they're trying to do is they're trying to get as homogeneous a group as they can, so they can measure effect of the drug and not just the biological nature of muscle loss. And I believe it was Peter Jones famously who said, we all have a muscle wasting disease. It's called age. And so, they try to cap it probably at 65 for an interventional therapy. The nice thing about the Clinical Trial Research Network, the Resolve study, and the MOVE study, though, is that they broaden that category. So they do allow older people to be a part of these observational studies where you go in and you get measured on regular intervals, and they track that measurement from a functional standpoint that's going to play into the clinical trial. And I've said this in some of our chapter meetings before, the real strong heroes of this clinical development and clinical pathway are the ones who volunteer for observational studies, because they're not getting anything out of it. They're giving of themselves so that clinical development can go on, so clinical trials can be successful, so we can know what to measure when you have an interventional therapy, a pill to take, and so that the FDA has good quantifiable measures of the effectiveness of a drug. Everybody who's volunteered for the Resolve study or the upcoming MOVE study, you deserve a whole chest full of medals, because that's what that is. But those are broader inclusion categories that do take much older families than some of our clinical trials do, because they're trying to get such a tight, homogeneous unit to measure effect by.
Yeah, I get this question a lot from people, and I know that at the personal level, it feels like you're being rejected, and then you're not having the opportunity to have access to a potential treatment. But the bigger picture is trying to get those treatments to everybody in the shortest possible time. So designing these studies with these narrow inclusion criteria helps to get more robust data and a stronger study that will get therapies to everybody faster. There's sort of almost a little bit of a conflict between the individual wanting to have access as soon as possible versus the whole community getting access. But we live in a system where there is this whole, regulatory apparatus, and that's the reality. So,
Right.
yeah.
June, we're going to
Yes.
reverse roles now. I'm going to ask you a question that
Oh,
just
okay.
came in. Rich says, I praise the Society's focus on development of treatments and growth of research and patient networks, but on a more practical impact of daily life. And I love this question. I wonder if we could provide info and guidance to patients on mobility, assisted devices, perhaps by partnering with government, business orgs, et cetera. I know that some of our chapters have actually recorded messages around this and some of those things. Would you like to answer that?
Certainly. So if you look at our FSHD University programming and blog posts, we do put out a lot of information about resources and guidance around the use of mobility devices and physical therapy, and just a whole host of just, how to keep your eyes from drying out at night, what to do if you're having trouble swallowing, and so on. So we, at the direct society level, we try to put out a lot of education on that. We always include presentations at our FSHD 360 conferences about that. A lot of the chapters will bring in people with that kind of information. And at the same time, we work with larger organizations because these issues are not just unique to FSHD. Issues around access to mobility devices, renovations to your home, renovations to your vehicle, how do you keep working? There's a whole host of things related to disability. And there are larger, better financed organizations in government and big nonprofits that focus on that. So we try to learn who they are and direct people to them. And so kind of that's sort of our two-pronged approach to try to support our community around those issues.
Good.
As a matter of fact, June, this coming Saturday, our brand new Ontario, Canada chapter is having a virtual meeting, and their guest speaker will address a lot of mobility devices. So if you're wanting to join, everyone can join virtual meetings from anywhere. Check our website for login information for our Ontario chapter meeting this Saturday.
Great. There's a question here. Do we have information on the study being done with testosterone and human growth hormone?
Yep.
How's it going and how come they thought to do this? It makes a lot of sense. Jamshid, you want to field that one?
Sure. We actually reached out to them. You and I reached out to the group in Rochester, and COVID really hampered their recruitment process. But we were, I think, June, you started reaching out to patient groups, and I think they were recruiting. They were done recruiting for that finally. So I think there was a combination of issues with bandwidth because that site runs a lot of different studies, and so they could only process so many patients to get the study going. But yeah, we're looking forward to the results.
Yeah.
It does make a lot of sense also.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
So
We're
near the end of our time,
Yeah.
past the end of our time.
I want to thank my colleagues. June, I want to thank you. You moderate so well and you answer so many questions because you have such a knowledge base. Beth, heart and soul, mind, attitude, ability, you are a perfect fit and we couldn't do without you. And Jamshid, your expertise and your intellects and your insight is really second to none. And it's helping, all of you are helping drive and fuel this endeavor. But to all of our families that joined us today, we couldn't do it without you. We need you. And with this one more thing, one group was interviewing me and they said, have you missed any opportunity? For instance, have you had to delay anything because of lack of funds or expertise or whatever? And it caused me to pause. And with any nonprofit, it's always a tension between advancing and accelerating the mission to accomplish it and how can you fund it? And because of you and your continued support and commitment, and we know that it will be there in the future. We're not slowing down. We're not stopping halfway. We'll keep going. Thanks to my colleagues. Heidi, thanks for hosting us. You know, it's great to have a director of stewardship to help us steward all of our families so well. And all of the staff at FSHD that I have the privilege of calling colleagues and friends. I appreciate them and I appreciate you. So thank you. Any final words, Heidi?
No, I just want to thank everybody for showing up today. I know we changed the time this time. Well, it seems like it worked because we had almost twice as many people this time as we did last fall. So thank you all for joining us. You'll get a copy of the slides and a link for the recording in a few days.
Thank you.
Again, thanks for everybody. See you
Thanks,
soon.
everybody.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.